I think it's important you said it's not to try and just copy and paste whatever Australia is doing, because our market is already invested in some of the measurement platforms that we've got to try to not compete, but to be at a similar standard of what's happening globally as much as possible. So there has already been a significant investment in that space. And I think to Kirsty's point, the majority of the media owners, they want their formats to be measured according to the best standard. But if some of the current standards are not available for their format in a specific environment, they've had to seek out other alternatives. And I think that it is a problem that would come up in a lot of different markets. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Billboard. We are really excited to welcome Gideon Adey to the podcast today, who is the CEO of GurOOH. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gideon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are.
The topic for today's episode is to discuss the key takeaways and insights from the recent World of Out of Home, the OOH conference that was hosted in Mexico. And when Kirsty and I were preparing for today's episode, we really wanted to bring somebody like yourself into the conversation who was at the conference, who could give us their insight and perspective on what was the main takeaways, what was the feelings, what were the major themes that came out of the conference. And as you also represent OOH as their measurement consultant and have been to a vast number of their conferences. So we felt that your experience would really come through on what OOH is all about and how to get the maximum from that type of a conference. This year's conference saw a record number of delegates, with over 600 delegates attending from 58 different countries. And I think that's really significant in painting the picture of the significance of the conference, but also the scale of the out-of-home industry globally. And again, it really highlights that although those conferences are not necessarily being able to be attended by everybody, I know from a South African perspective, the majority of people listening into this episode now would not have attended the conference, but we really want to shed some light and share the learnings from those conferences, and of course, encourage people to attend them and to find out what exactly goes on at the conferences and why they should try to attend them where possible. But before we dive into all the details of what went on in Mexico, Gideon, I wonder if you could just share with us and our audience a little bit about who you are and what role you fulfill from a OOH perspective, as well as what is OOH, who is OOH, if there is anyone listening who is not 100% familiar of OOH and their conferences. If you could just give us some background around that.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so I mean, my background is out of home, pretty much 35 years. 5 years on the media owner side with JCDecaux and what was then Clear Channel. 21 years on the buy side with Kinetic Group M, and then 5-6 years now doing my own thing, as it were. But I've always been in out of home. Little bit of press right at the beginning, but I try not to mention that. But yeah, my route through from sales to buying to planning to strategy took me into data in a big way. So I was on the board of GurOOH, which is the UK audience measurement for out of home, and I do some work for Ipsos as well on some of their projects around the world. So measurement's my big thing, and that kind of is how I got involved with OOH 5 years ago as a measurement consultant for them. Initially working on their publication of the global guidelines for out-of-home audience measurement. And there's a useful guide. It includes 11 different countries and how they've approached it, and that there are different ways of reaching the same kind of end game. So I do audience measurement, other kinds of measurement with OOH, attribution, that kind of thing. But also I conduct the Global Expenditure Survey, which allows us to get a good view of the out-of-home market globally. And that's published every year at Congress. So we came out last year, let's get this exactly right, $46.2 billion net spent. So we're not a small industry. It's 5% of the total market, but it's the only what you could say legacy or traditional or real world media that was actually growing, whereas TV, print, cinema, radio are in long-term decline. So out of homes is still growing. It's a great business to be in. That was two of your questions. Your third was about WOOH itself. Okay, so the World Out of Home Organization, it's kind of like a trade association for out of home practitioners. It has members, 250 odd members now, from the media owner side, the media buying side, from screen manufacturers to tech providers for out of home. And it's really a way of, I think collaboration is probably the biggest word we use at WOOH. And one of the members of these congresses, whether it's a regional forum or the annual congress, is that when you've got 600 people in the room, whatever problems you have in out of home, someone in the room will have had them and fixed them. You know, and if you're coming from South Africa and you're speaking to someone from Australia, you're not competing. You can share that kind of information. And it's a great forum for people to discuss their local issues, look at regulation, how that's been handled in the UK and how that's been handled in Australia, and apply that in America or whatever, you know. Actually, regulation in Spain's very on top of that at the moment. There's always someone in the room who can help.
Yeah.
And that's before you get to the content. I'd suggest, you know, it is definitely worth becoming members of the World Out of Home Organization. You know, the fees are moderate depending on the size of the business. And it gives you access to obviously the conferences, but also there's a huge database of stuff on the WOOH website. Every single conference has been recorded. All the presentations going back years are available there. But yeah, so it's about collaboration and shared learnings with the sole purpose of growing the global out-of-home industry.
You've unpacked so much in that intro, so thank you for that. I think what's really sticking with me, and I know we're going to unpack it in the detail of the episode, is around the collaboration piece, because collaboration and fragmentation kind of seem to go hand in hand. So we will get into the detail of that. But something you touched on around the global expenditure, I think is really critical, because sometimes, you know, we ask by partners in our local market, be there on the client side, media owner side, media agency side, kind of how big is the piece of the out-of-home pie? Is out-of-home growing? You know, there for a long time has been this feeling of we need to get to more than 5% of the spend on the schedules. There's been this like 5% number that's been hanging around everybody. How do we push the envelope? Which I think has been a great focus for the industry. And I wanted to ask, could you share any of the information from your report that you do from a global expenditure point of view, just from a top line perspective? How much of the pie does South Africa represent, or Africa, in that global figure?
Okay, Africa as a whole. So if you think global out of home being 46 billion, Africa represents 1.4 billion of that. Although when I do the survey, I get 95 countries responding, but our knowledge of the African market is limited very much to North Africa, Mediterranean, and Southern Africa. We get data for some West Africa and Kenya, but we do have a real weakness in our membership and also in our knowledge of Central Africa and East Africa. So we're probably underreporting Africa as a whole. Anyone out there listening to this has businesses in Central and Eastern Africa, please reach out to us. Because even if you're, and I say this to people in markets where they don't have associations, even if you're making an educated guess as to the size of your market, it will be better than my educated guess, because you're in. We could really do with representing Africa better.
I think that's critical. And also, even from a South African perspective, I know that, you know, if somebody had asked me now, put me on the spot and said, I need you to give me a figure from an out-of-home expenditure perspective, we understand that the Nielsen data is about 50% under-read from a South African point of view, from the number of media owners that are contributing their spend information for a variety of different reasons. But if that is the figure that's being looked at, we know that that is underrepresented. And then outdoor auditors provide an estimated spend data there. So those would be the two places that I would go to look. But I do agree with you. I think that collaboration piece around understanding the figure for Africa is underrepresented as Africa as a total, as well as the South African number is underrepresented, but it's still a figure that you need to work with.
Yeah, so we have South Africa pegged at a total of 122 million US dollars. Now, I know that is probably underreporting. We pick up on from the main media owners, and we get reports from several players there. But the informal economy, I don't think we get at all. You know, and I know that's a significant part of quite a lot of African territories. And so we make estimates on that, but yeah, more information is always good, and sharing information. The other thing that is kind of useful, and you talked about growth earlier, is that we see the growth is being driven predominantly by the digitization of art. And that's one of the topics that came out in the conference, although I think it's fairly clear now, the heavily digitized markets are growing fastest. You're investing in infrastructure and you're getting that back. You're giving more audience, you're giving more opportunities for advertisers, you're increasing the capacity and the flexibility of the medium.
Do you think that also that higher revenue for those more digitized markets, do you think that is because the cost for digital out of home obviously comes in at a higher cost than static? And that's what we found obviously within South Africa. That obviously the more digitized, the more higher price point they're obviously selling the medium at, which obviously in itself is already increasing the revenue.
Yeah, definitely. There's two factors there. One, it's a more expensive infrastructure, and therefore to get return, people are charging more. But it has more value to clients. I mean, we are already a very low cost medium. Our cost per thousand beats everything, really. And there was a report at Congress by Mark Boydman, who does a kind of global survey on cost per thousand across all media. And out-of-home, digital out-of-home as well, comes out very attractive where it's measured. And that, again, measurement's really important in order to demonstrate that kind of low-cost, high-reach. But also it has more value to advertisers because of the flexibility. Their ability to run multiple different executions, the ability to run day parts, the ability to buy moments. Again, when you have data and you can show a particular audience is on the move at a particular time of day and location, you buy that time and location.
I absolutely love digital out of home. I think Liv and I've spoken about it a few times when we had a little quick fire quiz the one day about getting to know your hosts. And we both ended up saying, quickly, what was your favorite format? And we said digital out of home. But I think that's just because we were on the spot. But I think we can't forget, the power of static out of home. And I think just driving digital out of home because it's the revenue driver, or it's got, that ability to increase revenue for multiple reasons, but it's also so dynamic. We know all the benefits of it. We still always need to remember the purpose and the place for static out of home within the market. What I found quite interesting, and I just want to circle back to your call out to the market and to the continent, is, being able to reach out to you to obviously get that expenditure and that showcasing what that expenditure is for the various markets across the continent, and working with you so that Africa has got a more realistic number that's being calculated from a global point of view. I think that's a big call out here. And I just wanted to restate that. And I do think what was quite interesting was, I did read this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a 10% increase in revenue from 2023 to the latest. And then there's still a projected increase for 2025 from a global expenditure point of view.
Definitely, yeah. 10% and 20% increase in digital out of home.
Yeah.
So 2025, we're predicting 49.8 billion. So this time next year, we could well be sitting on a 50 billion US dollar. And that's net billion US dollar industry, which is it's a great thing to be part of.
And then, interestingly enough, speaking to that, I saw Trish Guilford, who's from the Out of Home Measurement Council here in South Africa. She did an article about coming out of the World Out of Home Mexico conference. And one of the things she spoke about is that out of home, one of the key points that she took away was that out of home is the second choice for media buyers now. The fact that TV, radio, print, and the audiences are declining, but not so much, I think, declining is that they're fragmenting so much, and the way that they're consuming in those platforms and those channels, but that out of home is becoming that second choice for buyers. Is that a key takeout that you had also coming out of the conference?
There were some good speakers on that. Guy from Amazon and another guy from Ogilvy. So Amazon was Joao Mesquita, Amazon Prime, big fan of using out of home. And I think he surmised probably all of the topics very well. He was the opening keynote, and he literally said his issues with out of home as a major advertiser. And they were probably the key themes. It's difficult to buy, and that goes to fragmentation. And fixing fragmentation is not just a consolidation of ownership. It can be through platforms. It can be through other kind of trading associations, making things, I guess, more common standards across the industry. Poor creativity, and we addressed a lot on creativity in Mexico. Poor creativity because it is a totally visual medium. And if the copy is not good, then it doesn't work. And if it doesn't resonate with you, you don't remember it, which is great in one way because people don't get ad wear out. People don't get annoyed by out-of-home advertising. But it means we rely probably more than any other medium on creativity. And if we put out bad copy, we are doing ourselves a disservice as well as our clients. So you pull that one out. And the other thing which I kind of like was trusted measurement. Measurement's critical, and that's, and this is an online retailer and streamer and a massive user of out of home globally, probably maybe the second or first largest advertiser globally on out of home. And measurement is his critical issue.
Particularly when it comes to measurement, the measurement piece is so complex. I would love to get into the detail of this because you sit as the measurement advisor and expert in the space, is that from a South African market, we have the OMC, which is our most commonly accepted form of measurement for our industry. And a JIC was formed for that. And that is the measurement standard according to global best practice, according to WOO. But we do also have the platforms that have come to market around using online or mobile options or different ways of measuring. And I wanted to maybe find out from you, from your position, how are you seeing other markets kind of where there are different measurement options, not consolidating necessarily, but how are they coming together? How are other markets? You mentioned in your intro, and I've had the same moment, Kirsten and I've had it on the podcast, when you feel like we have these very specific African and South African problems that no one else can relate to. But then when you speak to global partners, we all are sharing the same problems. So I would love to hear in maybe some more of the advanced markets that have had measurement for longer, how is it playing out between the biggest currency in the country versus the other options that pop up? Because inevitably there will be other options in the other markets. Would love to just get your stance on that.
So there's this, for advertisers' perspective, they need common measurement across all out of home. And disparate metrics for different formats confuses them. They're non-comparable, and it's a barrier to sale. So consolidated measurement through a JIC is the kind of, I guess, gold standard. Other markets have approached this slightly differently. I guess that the shining star market at the moment is Australia, and they were at the Congress launching Move 2.0, and they've invested $19 billion in this.
Wow.
Okay, sure. Investing. It's not cost, it's investing. But their business just keeps growing. It's a big market, and they're representing, I think, 12% of the cake. They have taken share based on having a unified measurement system across all formats, all environments, so transit, metro,
all environments,
all environments, all out-of-home environments. Yeah.
Wow.
The next step, of course, is measurement cross media. It's a challenge and slightly out of our wheelhouse at the moment. But cross-media measurement is critical from an advertiser's perspective. They need to know $1 here versus $1 there. What's it giving me? So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the gold standard. They've invested a lot in it, but they have seen growth throughout that. And there's a wonderful slide which shows the kind of growth in out of home in Australia, mirrored by the number of logins for the Move platform to get audience data. And they just follow each other. See COVID and then digital, and it's so transparent. The better the data, the better you can defend your industry against other media, the more money you get. So
Yeah.
that's one end of it. The markets that are, I guess, having their measurement fragment, I think the US would probably be a good example of that as a large market, where they have had currency. It's had a few wobbles over the last year, and we've seen multiple other metrics appear because media owners were dissatisfied with their environment or their format being measured. And this has not been good. I mean, Australia's running at 12%, the US is running at 3%. Yeah. It doesn't allow the industry as a whole to be seen as a cohesive unit. So I'm a big fan of collective measurement and collective finance of that measurement. And it's big ticket stuff, but the returns are there for everybody, you know. So that's kind of where we promote as Woo. However, I've seen some very good work in Mexico on the accreditation type approach. So where you have a non-for-profit body that accredits people's measurement techniques. Very rigorous, and something we're hoping to expose more of over the next year. And what they do is they make sure that people are actually doing what they say they're doing. When someone says I'm measuring people and they're using a Wi-Fi sensor, you're measuring phones. You're also measuring photocopiers, code machines, and so on. Anything with Wi-Fi. That's fine, but just be clear about what it is that you're measuring. They say I'm measuring people, and say no, you're measuring cars. Now that might actually be an underestimate of people, but be very clear as to what you're measuring. So at least advertisers or buyers can make reasonable comparisons between different metrics.
I think the problem for a market like ours or like the region of Africa and the market of South Africa is the number of media owner players. And I think this is going to take us into the fragmentation conversation here, is that, you know, the number of media owners and wanting their own measurement that I guess for their environments or their specific types of formats, because we have vastness of different formats and environments here in South Africa, particularly in the low end mass reach market. But that certain media owners are wanting their own approach, or, you know, wanting their own methodology, or the current, you know, JIC or currency is not covering those environments. So people are wanting to move forward and have something to rationale to their clients and to sell it. So they've gone and found alternative data partners, and rightly so, because they want to be able to give some measurement and some rationale for their platforms. So I think it's also about, I guess, one, investment into the currency, and I think getting that to be able to cover more environments and more formats as the standard currency. But then at the same time, it's this kind of speed of all these media owners in the market who are going to different options and different affordable options to kind of get something in so that they can go to clients and present and say, you know, this is, you know, the reach or the expected performance of that format. But there's still a lot of formats and environments that don't have measurement, and that's why those players have had to seek alternative options.
Yeah, definitely. Fragmented measurement is challenging for buyers. However, it's totally defensible for media owners to want to create measurement for their own media if that measurement's not available through the currency. However, you know, it's working with each other to make those metrics comparable, which is really important. You can't look at Australia or the UK and say, that's our next step, you know, and suddenly, you know, rustle around and come up with $10 million to do it. So there is, I think it's worth looking at standards and accreditation to make sure that those different metrics do have some comparability. You know, what are you measuring? Are you measuring people? Are you measuring devices? Are you measuring vehicles? You know, get clarity in what's actually being measured.
Yeah.
And transparency, because that adds credibility and trust. Metrics are metrics without trust. With trust, you have currency.
Nalissa Media, your brand, their eyes, amplified with our out-of-home solutions. Get your brand to the people with Nalissa Media's dynamic out-of-home media solutions, tailored to fit your unique campaign needs. Whether you want to engage audiences on billboards, transit ads, or digital screens, we have the right platform for you. Elevate your brand visibility and impact with our innovative and cost-effective solutions.
I think it's important you said it's not to try and just copy and paste whatever Australia is doing, because our market is already invested in some of the measurement platforms that we've got to try to not compete, but to be at a similar standard of what's happening globally as much as possible. So there has already been a significant investment in that space. And I think to Kirsty's point, the majority of the media owners, they want their formats to be measured according to the best standard. But if some of the current standards are not available for their format in a specific environment, they've had to seek out other alternatives. And I think that it is a problem that would come up in a lot of different markets, but the agencies are receiving all the information and need to understand how to distill that and then package it for the client in such a way that it doesn't feel like a barrier to wanting to spend in out of home, that you've got a fragmented media owner market, and then it's very difficult to buy out of home because of the further complexities of not being able to compare the media metrics effectively. So I think it's a long path, if I could say that. I think we're in a great space that there was a time where we were having discussions about there being no measurement. And I think that now we're in a place that there's almost an abundance of measurement available. Standardize it with understanding some environments will need to be measured differently.
I think that's so important to land on. And I think let's talk about collaboration. Let's talk about consolidation now, and let's talk about that topic and how it came up at Woo. And I think how are markets navigating this fragmentation piece? And you were saying earlier on, I think you touched on it, that it's not to navigate fragmentation. The solution's not just consolidation. And I'd love to just hear from you what other pieces came up around this topic at Woo. That we could have some insight on.
Automation doesn't mean real-time buying. Automation is having common standards on print, having common formats, or at least common proportions, having common posting dates, having just so that I can buy across the market with a standard form, So there will always be special locations, but the more standardization that can be brought, the easier it is for people to buy. So that automation was a big piece. There was a good session on that with view, build-ups, moving walls, and of course broadside. Yeah, I'll say automation is a way of bringing together multiple.
And we have had a few. Well, I know of different automated, not just from your DSP, SSP, programmatic buys. I'm talking about just automated platforms or systems to just buy out of home from a platform or system, not just programmatic, just out of home buys. And we know that there's quite a few people in our markets that has tried to do that. But I think what it really does still needs that collaboration of people coming together on a platform. And I think the call out at Woo Africa was very much that, a key takeout for me that came out of the Woo Africa Forum was around the need for more collaboration in our market. And I think if we're able to see not each other as the competition, but seeing the Googles and the other media channels as the competition and letting us collaborate as an industry, particularly media owners amongst themselves, bring more collaboration, you were able to bring a lot more of these efficiencies to the market, such as collaborating in a way to automated buy. So it makes it easier for agencies to be able to navigate the 400, 500 media owners in one country alone. And I think it really stems down to the need for collaboration to be able to bring these types of efficiencies into the market, which ultimately, one, will help us from a measurement point of view, two, will help us from an automated buy point of view, but ultimately, as you said, it will increase the revenue and the portion of the out-of-home pie.
Yeah, it's removing friction from people buying out of home. We compete with each other when we're going for local authority tenders, when we're going for landlords. That's fair, good competition, But when we compete with each other for the out-of-home pot, we're only competing for the out-of-home pot. If we compete with each other collectively for the media pot, then we're competing with Google. But if you're focused on getting my share of the out-of-home budget, you're not growing the out-of-home budget.
Kirst, I love how you've brought the loop of the Africa Forum through, because I'm sure a lot more people who are listening to this would have attended the Africa Forum versus the conference in Mexico. And I think that it's important that those learnings and the collaboration piece is such like a central theme that I think we're going to continue to see coming through, but we're also seeing significant leaps being taken on closing some of those gaps around collaboration. And Gideon, as we close today's episode off, I wanted to ask you our final question. You know, if we look at Mexico, I know when I've worked in my previous experience on some other FMCG brands, often the South African market is compared to either Mexico or Spain, also from a scale perspective, from a country composition perspective, and from being a developing market. And I wanted to ask, coming away from the Mexican conference and some local insights, do you have any nuggets or thoughts to leave us with around something you thought the Mexican market is doing very well that South Africa could lean on or learn from, being a developing market too?
I think it's this accreditation piece, which I touched on earlier. There's a company called SIM. I'll be following them over the next year as they develop their guidelines, and we should be sharing that, of course, with members, of having a non-profit separate body that accredits our measurement approach. And we'll also be looking at standardization across the market. So, and they already accredit press measurement, radio measurement, and TV measurement. So they're a trusted group. I think that it's, whether that's via a trade association or whether the existing JIC, it's having a non-partisan body.
Hold on. Before we close, I have to ask, what was MOCHA like at World Out of Home? And was it a big call out? And is everybody rallying behind it?
Yes. No, I mean, creative is, we live and breathe on creative. It's incredibly important. You can measure how many people go past, but if they don't see or care about the ad, then it's no point. Yeah, no, Tim is brilliant on stage. He's very high energy, and we are going to make home creative.
I'm so glad you put the hat on, Gideon, and let me tell you why. Because I saw somebody recapped on LinkedIn, and one of they said was Tim had hats, or there was hats. And I was like, what was the hats? Now I know.
Now we know. For anyone listening on Spotify, Gideon's wearing a really cool black and white MOCHA hat. So I think they need to start selling merch.
Yeah, I mean, you may well do, actually. You may start selling merch. But Fragmentation have a long history of very creative work and sponsoring creative awards and celebrating creativity in out of home. And that's very important as well.
Fantastic place to end the episode. I just wanted to circle on the fact that Kantar actually has a study where they say that 50% of your campaign's performance is creative. And that's a big piece for out of home. And that's why MOCHA, which is Make Out of Home Creative Great Again, is such a big movement for out of home industry. And it is something that Tim Deakey has been speaking about on a number of stages. And again, at the World Out of Home Mexico conference. And I would just like to remind everybody that the next conference is in London in 2026, and I think it's the 3rd to the 5th of June. You can go to the World Out of Home organization website, which we will also drop into the post when we do post this on our LinkedIn page. We really do recommend to get to any of the forums you can or any of the global conferences. There's so much shared insight, so much shared knowledge. Myself and Liv were unable to this year get to Mexico, but we hope in the future to be at another of the WOO conferences or forums. Africa Forum last year was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for coming onto this episode with us today. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge and what you have shared with us. And I'm sure we will have you on again one day soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2.